A billionaire father watches in stunned silence as his disabled son invites a black waitress to dance, and her simple decision to say yes changes everything. The restaurant, Kingsley's, one of Manhattan's most elite, fell completely silent. Cutlery paused in mid-air, conversations died mid-sentence, and all eyes turned to the space between two tables, where 10-year-old Lucas Montgomery, his legs trapped in metal braces, extended a trembling hand to Diana Johnson, the restaurant's only black waitress. The pianist had just begun a soft tune when Lucas moved on impulse, the idea of a dance striking him suddenly. Before Diana could even react, the manager's voice pierced the room. "Sir, control your son. That's inappropriate. This is not a dance hall, and our employees are not here to entertain children. Richard Montgomery, billionaire head of Montgomery Investments, swallowed hard. It was the first time he'd taken Lucas out in public since the car accident that had partially paralyzed the boy 2 years ago. "Lucas, sit down," he said quietly but firmly. Diana stood still, her eyes moving between the manager, the billionaire, and the small hand still hanging in the air. In her 5 years at the restaurant, she had perfected the art of being invisible, especially to customers like Montgomery. "Mr. Thornton, I'm leaving. My shift is over." Her voice was steady as she removed her apron and laid it gently on a tray. Then, without hesitation, she took Lucas's hand. "I can't dance in an apron." Richard stood up. "What do you think you're doing?" "I'm accepting an invitation, sir," she replied without flinching. Lucas took a step forward, the metal in his braces shrieking against the floor, but Diana didn't rush or guide him. She simply matched his slow, uneven pace. "She's getting fired tomorrow," someone whispered. Richard was frozen, watching them. A memory of his late wife, Elizabeth, dancing in the living room with Lucas flashed in his mind. "It's not about perfection," she had once said. "It's about connection." Diana's steady presence transformed Lucas. The fear in his eyes shifted to focus, then to quiet pride. For the first time since the accident, he wasn't being helped. He was leading. "Mr. Montgomery," the manager said, trying to reclaim control, "this won't happen again. She'll be disciplined." Richard didn't respond. He could have ended Diana's career with a single word. The restaurant waited, but all Richard could see was his son's smile. After a few dance steps, Diana gently led Lucas back. "Thank you for asking me out," she said with adult-like formality. "It was an honor." As she turned to leave, Richard said, "Wait." His voice was different, uncertain. "What's your full name?" "Diana Johnson, sir." He nodded, as if committing it to memory. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out a card, and offered it to her. "My office, tomorrow, 10 a.m. The room held its breath. Diana took the card without expression, though her hand trembled slightly. "Dad?" Lucas said softly as she walked away. "Why did you do that?" The question hung in the air, sharp as any rebuke. Richard looked at his son and, for the first time in years, saw not a fragile responsibility, but a whole person he had failed to truly see. Dinner resumed under a layer of awkward silence. No one noticed Diana's final glance, one that carried not fear, but a calm resolve, an answer to the unspoken storm forming in Richard Montgomery's heart. The next morning, the lobby of Montgomery Tower gleamed in sunlight. Diana Johnson, dressed in a simple navy skirt and white blouse, felt entirely out of place. "Diana Johnson to see Mr. Montgomery," she told the receptionist. "18th floor. Miss Winters will see you," came the curt reply. Inside the elevator, Diana held her worn purse tight. She wasn't nervous. She had faced worse, much worse. Miss Winters, Montgomery's assistant, was sleek and stern. "Mr. Montgomery is in a conference call. Follow me." As they walked, through the mirrored halls, Diana felt the stares. A black woman walking through the executive wing wasn't something people saw every day. "He had you fired, didn't he?" Winters asked suddenly. "It happens. People like you? People like me?" Diana raised an eyebrow. Winters adjusted her glasses. "Employees who don't know their place." Diana smiled, unimpressed. "And where exactly would that be?" Before Winters could answer, the phone rang. "He'll see you now." Richard's office looked out over Manhattan. He stood at the window like a man surveying his domain. "Mr. Montgomery," Diana greeted. "Him." "Miss Johnson," he said, turning with a careful expression. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." The silence was deliberate, a tactic Diana recognized. It was meant to make her uneasy. "Do you have a background?" he finally asked. "Excuse me." "Education?" "College. Bachelor's in Child Development from NYU. Master's in Special Education, unfinished." Something flickered across Richard's face. "And you work as a waitress?" "I work 3 jobs, the restaurant, a bookstore, and tutoring when I can find students." Richard opened a folder on his desk. "I did some research. I wanted to know who danced with my son." Inside were photos of a modest community center. "Freedom Steps," he said. "You founded it 6 years ago." "I co-founded it with my sister Zoe, a dance program for children with physical disabilities. It's closing. No funding." "I'm not here asking for money." "Then why did you come?" "You invited me." Richard gave a dry laugh. "Fair enough." He stood, restless. "I want you to work for me." Diana blinked. "As a waitress?" "As a therapeutic companion. For Lucas." He struggled to say his son's name. Diana noticed his eyes drift to a photo on his desk. Elizabeth, holding a baby. "I have the best doctors, therapists. But what you did..." He paused. He smiled. For the first time in years. It was just a dance. It was the first time he led. "I don't want a dancer. I want someone who can follow." Diana saw it then. Beneath the billionaire's control was a desperate father. "I'll pay you 5 times your current income." "No." Richard looked stunned. "I don't work for people who see my color or my paycheck before they see my skill. And I don't help people buy their way out of emotional wounds." "You're turning down a life-changing offer out of pride?" "Out of dignity," Diana corrected. "And because your son deserves someone who chooses to care." At the door, she paused. "Lucas doesn't need more experts. He needs space to lead his own life. You don't know my son." "No. But I know people like him. People whose bodies are limited, but whose spirits are caged more by others than themselves." She placed a card on his desk. "Freedom Steps, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 4 p.m. If you'd like to bring Lucas, the first class is free." As Diana left, she passed Winters, who had clearly been listening behind the door. "You just turned down an offer from Richard Montgomery," she whispered, incredulous. "Are you crazy?" Diana smiled. "Maybe, but I'd rather be crazy than be property." The following Wednesday, Diana was at the reception desk of the community center when Zoe, her sister and co-founder of the project, came running up. "There's a Bentley parked outside," she whispered nervously, adjusting her hijab. "And you won't believe who's inside." Through the window, Diana saw the luxurious car. Lucas was in the back seat, looking anxiously out. Richard remained in the driver's seat, his hands on the wheel as if wrestling with something internal. "He's not coming in," Zoe predicted. "Men like him don't come to places like this." Diana smiled, remembering Lucas's gaze during those brief moments of dancing. Don't underestimate the power of a determined son. As they watched, the car door opened. Lucas stepped out, adjusting his gadgets. Then, to everyone's surprise, Richard got out too. He looked out of place in his casual pants and sweater, an obvious attempt to dress down, though everything about him still screamed privilege. "I told you he'd come," Diana murmured. more to herself. Zoe stared. "What did you do?" Diana didn't answer. Her eyes sparkled with a secret even her sister didn't fully know. In her tiny Bronx apartment, hidden under her bed, was a notebook filled with observations about children like Lucas and men like Richard Montgomery. Years of research, sketches, and a plan that had begun with a simple decision to accept a dance. What Richard didn't know, what he couldn't begin to imagine in his world of glass towers and bottom lines, was that Diana Johnson wasn't just a waitress who danced with his son. She was a woman with a mission, and his empire of isolation and power was about to face a challenge it couldn't buy its way out of. The truth that some of life's greatest lessons have to be lived. Freedom Steps operated out of an old warehouse. Handmade posters covered the walls with messages like, "Your rhythm, your rules, and every move counts." When Richard and Lucas entered, children with various mobility devices were moving, freely to a soft beat. Diana approached in her plain clothes with the program's logo. "Welcome." Lucas watched, fascinated, as a girl in a wheelchair spun in perfect circles and a boy with a prosthetic leg practiced a sequence of steps. "It looks chaotic," Richard said, clearly uncomfortable. "There is structure," Diana replied, "just not the kind you're used to." She turned to Lucas. "Would you like to join in?" Lucas nodded, but looked hesitantly at his father. "Go on," Richard said, tense. "I'll be right here." As Diana led Lucas into the group, Zoe offered Richard a chair. "The first day is always the hardest," she said. "For the parents, not the kids." "This isn't therapy," Richard argued. "I hired the best rehab specialists." "And how has that been working for Lucas?" Zoe asked gently. The studio door opened. An older woman entered, leaning on a cane, her gray hair braided elegantly, her presence commanding. "Dr. Elaine Mercer," Zoe whispered. "Neuroscientist, retired Harvard." Dr. Mercer greeted several children before noticing Richard. "Mr. Montgomery, you've rejected my research proposal 3 times in the past 2 years. I didn't expect to see you here. I oversee the research program," she said. "We're studying how non-directive movement approaches affect neural reconfiguration in children with motor challenges." Richard frowned. "I thought this was just a dance class." Diana returned, Lucas now moving with another child. "Freedom Steps is a pilot rehabilitation program," she explained. "We use adaptive dance, grounded in neuroscience." "Then why are you working as a waitress?" "Because we don't have funding yet, because people like you rejected us." It clicked. "You were Dr. Mercer's assistant." "Co-author," Mercer corrected. "Diana had to leave her master's program to care for her sister. But her theoretical work, groundbreaking. You knew who I was at the restaurant." "From the moment you walked in," Diana confirmed. "And when Lucas danced, I saw an opportunity to show, not tell." "Was it staged? The dance?" "Absolutely not. Lucas chose to get up. I chose to follow." Reporters entered the room. Richard tensed. "What's this?" "Part 2, Diana said softly. Zoe handed him a magazine with a fresh article. "Revolutionary motor rehabilitation methodology shows promising results." "We published our initial results today," Dr. Mercer said, "and invited the press." "You used my son for PR," Richard said, his voice cold. Diana led him into a side room. Dozens of children's photos covered the walls, each with handwritten progress notes. One empty frame stood alone. "What's that?" "Our future. A full center. 500 children a year instead of 50. You orchestrated this. The dance, the meeting, this visit on press day." "I saw an opening. When you canceled our meeting without reading the proposal, I promised myself I'd find another way." "Diana," Zoe interrupted. "It's Lucas." They rushed back. Lucas was in the center of the room. The music had stopped. He had removed one of his braces and was trying to balance on a single support. "Lucas," Richard stepped forward. "Wait," Diana whispered. Lucas focused. Then, to everyone's astonishment, especially his father's, he took a full step, wobbly, small, but his. The children erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed. Richard's usually unreadable face was lit with emotion, eyes wet with unshed tears. That's why we created Freedom Steps, Diana said. Not perfect steps, first steps. Richard watched his son, not as a project, but as a boy discovering his strength. This could have happened without manipulating me. It could have, if you'd answered our calls, read the proposals. You didn't. The reporters saw Richard. A murmur rose. Lucas kept practicing, unaware of the tension. Richard stood at a crossroads. He could withdraw and protect his pride, or step into a moment his son had created. Between his old power and Lucas's freedom, Richard Montgomery was in unfamiliar territory. He looked at his smiling son, the sea, waiting reporters. And then, something inside him shifted. He stepped forward. Mr. Montgomery, a reporter asked, is it true your foundation rejected funding this program 3 times? Richard looked at Lucas. Then he smiled. You know what's hardest for someone like me? He asked, loud enough for all to hear, admitting when we're wrong. Silence. The Montgomery Foundation is committing to fund Freedom Steps for the next 5 years and to build a permanent center based on Dr. Mercer and Ms. Johnson's methods. Flashes exploded. Zoe gasped. One condition, Richard added, eyes on Diana. Ms. Johnson retains full autonomy, no corporate interference. 3 months later, bulldozers were breaking ground on the new Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center. It wasn't the most luxurious Montgomery had ever funded, but it was the most innovative. And every square foot was designed with a single mission, to make sure the first step was always possible. From the children and their families, Diana supervised the construction frequently but never alone. Lucas showed up regularly, sometimes bringing other children with him, and to the staff's continued surprise, Richard Montgomery also appeared, silently observing the progress. I never thought you'd actually show up at board meetings, Diana commented one afternoon as they reviewed the plans. I never thought I'd have to study neuroplasticity at 50, Richard replied, rubbing his tired eyes. In front of him was a scientific article covered in post-it notes. But here we are. Diana looked at the man curiously. Is this part of your public penance? Or do you really care? Lucas asked to have his second brace removed last week. I know. He told me, Richard said. His previous physical therapist said that would be impossible for at least 2 years. Diana smiled. But you fired her, remember? Because you told me she was wrong. And she was. Diana pointed to a photo of Lucas balancing with only one crutch. He's progressing faster than any traditional medical prediction. Why did you never accept my apology? Richard asked suddenly. Because you never apologized. You redirected resources, changed policies, funded our program. That's not an apology. It's compensation. Richard nodded slowly. Fair. At the opening ceremony 6 months later, the contrast with that night in the restaurant couldn't have been greater. The huge adaptive space was filled with children using various mobility devices, all moving freely. In the center of the main hall, Lucas, now wearing only a lightweight brace on his left leg, led a small choreographed routine with 3 other children. His movements were still limited, but they flowed with a confidence no doctor had predicted. Richard watched from a distance, not interfering. He doesn't need you to hold him anymore, Diana said, approaching quietly. No, Richard agreed, but he still needs me to be around. Crucial difference. Richard turned to face her. Thank you, he said simply. For what, exactly? For teaching me to follow. A reporter approached. Mr. Montgomery, how does it feel to see your son's progress? Richard looked at Lucas, now helping a younger girl find her balance. Proud. not of what he's overcome, but of what he's created for others. And what's been the biggest lesson you've learned on this journey? Richard Montgomery, the man once known only for his financial empire, looked directly into the camera. That true leaders aren't those who guide others down the path they believe is right, but those who have the courage to follow when someone shows them a better way. A year later, the Freedom Steps program expanded to 3 new cities. Diana received the Pediatric Rehabilitation Innovation Award, and her methodology began to be implemented in hospitals across the country. Lucas, now using only a light cane on difficult days, enrolled in regular school and became a youth spokesperson for the program, encouraging other children to find their own pace. And Richard learned the hardest and most valuable lesson of all, that true power does not lie in controlling every move, but in knowing when it is time to take a step back and let others lead the way. In a world where powerful people rarely change their perspectives, and where those without power often remain in the shadows, the story of Richard, Diana, and Lucas reminds us that true transformation occurs when we cross the invisible boundaries that separate us, when a billionaire learns from a waitress, when a father follows in his son's footsteps. If this story about how a simple gesture of dignity changed lives forever touched your heart, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Because we believe the most profound revolutions don't start with grand manifestos or billion-dollar fortunes. They begin when someone has the courage to take an authentic first step, and someone else has the wisdom to follow.